But in terms of our early stages, whiteness, as we understand it, race, as we understand it, didn't exist. That may be hard to understand now because it's so prevalent. Everybody seems to have a race. But race actually came into being, and we can trace that being. And much of the formation of how we think about race came out of the New World, that is, when people came to the Americas from Europe. And there were people from Africa, and there were people from Europe, and there were the elites. And of course there were the people who were already here, the native people. And the elites tried to organize the people from Africa, the workers from Europe, indentured servers, and the native people to actually control them, to extract resources from them. And at some point, the people from Africa and the people from Europe decided to make common cause. They lived together, they worked together, they intermarried, they had children. It wasn't perfect, but there probably was much more what we would call interracial contact then than there is now. And it didn't seem odd at all. And at some point, it occurred to them that, look, we're doing all the work. We have no control over our lives. So there's this rebellion called the Bacon Rebellion, where they rebelled against the elite. And they demanded land, and they demanded greater democracy. They demanded a right to participate in the governance of the colony. And the elites rejected that. And this rebellion, and the rebellion was quite successful, called the Bacon Rebellion. The elites responded by saying, look, we have too many workers, and if they work together in a common cause, it's going to be hard to manage them. So they tried to experiment with separating the Africans and Europeans. And it took them almost 100 years. They tried religion, they tried language, they tried place of origin, and they stumbled upon race. Now they couldn't start with race because race didn't exist. So they couldn't just think of it. They had to experiment. And they start passing new laws like anti-miscegenation laws. And they told the now newly minted whites that your role is to identify with the elites. You're not an elite yourself, but you should identify with the elites, and you should police the non-whites. And they create slave patrols. But also they created a new identity, white identity. It had not existed before. And the white identity was that middle stratum, that stratum of identifying with the elites and controlling the non-whites. And it's important in terms of saying this that the elites didn't think of themselves as white. Yes, they were Europeans. What they thought of themselves were the elites. And because there had been this history where whites were so close to what was then blacks, there's always a fear that you might fall back into that space. So there's always this anxiety. An early definition of whites were defined in terms of not being black. It was a negative definition. Interesting, the Bacon Rebellion, Bacon himself was white, but it became known as a rebellion driven by blacks because they were trying to create a sense of blackness being scary and somehow a threat to whiteness. What's important in terms of this history is that whiteness itself never was the top dog. There was always the elites. So when we look at understanding race today in the economy, we sometimes think in terms of whites and non-whites, or whites and blacks, Latinos, others. And it has some currency, that's real. But missing from that formulation are the role of the elites. And the colonies, Virginia being the most important, was a corporation. So Virginia was literally owned by a corporation and governed by a corporation for the crown to extract as much resources as possible from people, from land. And to some extent, that formulation we still live with today, even though it's been updated.